12 years of secretly building the foundation behind a multi-million-dollar clinic chain, writing every single line of operating code with my own hands. And all I received at the 10th anniversary gala was a single insult. You're just a useless anchor living off me. My name is Marcus Vance from the Woodlands, Texas. Do not look away from this screen. Because what I handed her right on that stage in front of 100 high society's guests that night is going to teach her a permanent lesson. When a woman mistakes the man who built her empire for a helpless parasite, she triggers a countdown that will shatter every single illusion she built her life upon. For 12 years, I was the invisible force, keeping her luxury lifestyle afloat while she treated me like a ghost in my own home. She thought I was just a passive husband quietly taking her insults. She had no idea that while she was playing the wealthy corporate mogul for her elite social circle, I was preparing a legal trap, a trap that would dismantle her pride, reclaim my dignity, and leave her standing alone inside an empire she never truly owned. Welcome to Dad's ultimate payback. Get comfortable, hit that like button, and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from today. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of what happened next. Back in 2012, long before the cold dismissals and the condescending glances across court's countertops, Evelyn and I were two completely different people living in two completely different worlds. She had just graduated from dental school, but she was absolutely drowning under a mountain of predatory student debt. Over $180,000, compounding faster than she could breathe. Debt collectors were calling her personal cell phone before her alarm went off in the morning. Her credit score was completely ruined, and financial institutions refused to lend her a single dime to open her dream practice. She was brilliant, fiercely ambitious, and utterly trapped. I was 31 years old, pulling serious weight as a senior software infrastructure engineer in Houston. The hours were brutal, 70 hours a week easily, and I had spent nearly a decade developing a proprietary logistics automation algorithm that I owned entirely as premarital intellectual property. When I saw the woman I loved being crushed under the weight of her past, I made a decision. I sold the complete source code rights to a tech conglomerate in a single lump sum transaction and pledged my premarital investment portfolio as collateral to guarantee a commercial loan for her first practice on Woodlands Parkway. At the grand opening reception for Vance Dental, surrounded by fresh flowers and polished glass, I handed her a small leather folder in her private office away from the crowd. Inside was the bank's primary guarantor approval along with a wire transfer receipt showing her commercial lease deposit fully paid from my personal premarital assets. No public speeches. No grand spectacle, just 30 seconds between the two of us. When she opened the folder and saw my single signature backing her entire career, her knees buckled. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "You're saving us, Marcus," she wept, holding her hand over her heart as tears ruined her makeup. "This clinic is going to be our sacred family sanctuary. I swear to you, I will cherish this place and honor what you've done for our family forever." I held her close, kissing her forehead softly. "We're building our future together," I reassured her. That was the exact moment I believed I had laid an unbreakable foundation with my new wife. What I didn't realize until much later was that toxicity already ran deep in her family's bloodline. Less than 20 minutes after that emotional moment, I walked toward the catering station to grab 2 glasses of sparkling water. As I rounded the corner near the velvet curtains, I caught the unmistakable, sharp voice of Evelyn's mother, Victoria, a wealthy socialite from River Oaks, whispering intently to Evelyn's older brother, Julian. Victoria was adjusting her diamond necklace with a subtle sneer, leaning in close. "Don't let your sister get fooled by his little sacrifice," Victoria hissed quietly. "He's just an ordinary IT guy taking a risk because he knows Evelyn is going to make millions one day. He's chaining himself to her rising star because he couldn't achieve true status on his own. Mark my words, he's securing a free ride on her back." Julian nodded along with a cold smirk, looking toward Evelyn's office with disdain. The words hit me like a splash of ice water, but I stood there in my suit, took a deep breath, and chose not to cause a scene. I naively told myself that my hard work over time would prove my devotion and melt away her family's deep-seated arrogance. Instead of arguing, I threw myself into the grueling physical labor of making her dream a reality. To save every possible dollar of our startup capital, I spent 2 straight weeks working night shifts at the clinic after finishing my daytime engineering job. I was on my knees in my work clothes until 3 in the morning, laying down floor tiles, painting office walls, and personally assembling and networking every single computer workstation in the building. My hands were calloused, my back ached constantly, but I took immense pride in knowing that every dollar I saved went directly into securing my wife's professional freedom. However, the moment Vance Dental turned its very first profitable quarter, a dark, subtle shift occurred behind closed doors. Without saying a word to me, Evelyn drove to a separate bank branch in Spring, Texas, and established a completely private corporate secondary account that I had zero oversight or access to. 2 weeks later, while I was out in the backyard installing an HOA-approved fence for our new home, a freight delivery truck pulled up to the house. A heavy, fireproof digital safe was unloaded and brought directly up to her private home office closet. When I walked upstairs in my dirt-stained clothes and asked her why she needed a coated steel vault tucked behind her wardrobe, her posture instantly turned icy and defensive. She set the digital combination without letting me see the keypad, turned around, and crossed her arms. A modern, high-earning professional woman needs her own financial privacy, Marcus, she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge that perfectly echoed her mother's tone. It's not personal, it's just smart business. I stood in the doorway, staring at the black steel box resting in the corner, realizing that while I had poured every single premarital asset I owned into her foundation, my wife was already building a fortress to protect herself from me. Over the next 7 years, a quiet, insidious poison seeped into the core of our marriage. Guided by the custom enterprise software ecosystem I engineered specifically for her practice, a proprietary CRM and ERP system that seamlessly automated patient scheduling, billing, inventory, and multi-location logistics, Vance Cosmetic Dentistry exploded from a modest single office into a thriving 3-branch empire across Montgomery and Harris counties. In a healthy partnership, that monumental milestone would have been celebrated as a joint victory built on shared sacrifice. In ours, it served as the catalyst for an insatiable, blinding arrogance. It began with her leased white Porsche Cayenne Coupe, a gleaming luxury machine with red leather interior that roared into our driveway like a siren, announcing her newfound status to the entire neighborhood. Then came the exclusive membership at the Carlton Woods Country Club, followed by a relentless flood of packages from Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue. Soon, Evelyn was casually blowing through $15,000 a month on designer handbags, European vacations, and $500 champagne lunches with her socialite circle, filling her Instagram feed with staged photos, captioned with boasts about how her relentless hustle built her lavish lifestyle. She certainly worked hard at the chair, but the grotesque truth she conveniently chose to ignore was that she was operating with zero personal overhead. My daily existence had become a tightrope walk of financial sacrifice. After stepping down from my full-time corporate role to manage our home and build her software, I took on selective freelance infrastructure consulting contracts off Research Forest Drive. Every single dollar I earned, combined with my remaining premarital savings, went straight into keeping our family's foundation standing. Month after month, $4,100 was stripped from my accounts for the mortgage on our 4-bedroom home, alongside thousands more for semi-annual Harris and Montgomery County property taxes, HOA dues, home maintenance, and the comprehensive family health insurance policy that kept all 4 of us covered without a single gap. Meanwhile, Evelyn's massive monthly take-home pay remained completely untouched, serving as her personal fun money. She was living like a trust fund billionaire in the woodlands simply because I was quietly functioning as her entire financial infrastructure. She enjoyed absolute luxury while I bore the crushing weight of real life costs on my shoulders. The toxic fruit of this arrangement ripened during a lavish Sunday afternoon barbecue at the Carlton Woods Country Club, hosted by her family. Evelyn's mother, Victoria, had gathered a circle of prominent Houston oil executives and medical practice owners around a private pavilion. 17-year-old Chloe and 14-year-old Ethan were sitting nearby with their cousins. I was passing a tray of grilled appetizers when Evelyn's older brother, Julian, a man who had failed at 3 separate business ventures funded by his mother, deliberately set his crystal tumbler down, adjusted his polo shirt, and raised his voice just enough to command the attention of the surrounding table. "Marcus, buddy?" Julian asked, with a patronizing, loud smirk. "Aren't you embarrassed driving that old 2018 Ford F-150 Lariat into the country club valet parking? I mean, every time you pull up behind the Range Rovers, you look like an electrician coming in to service the circuit breakers." Laughter rippled through the table. I felt my jaw tighten, but before I could utter a word, Evelyn jumped right in to twist the knife deeper into my chest. She patted her brother's hand, let out a condescending chuckle, and glanced at our children. "Oh, Julian, don't press him," Evelyn sneered smoothly, swirling her wine glass. Marcus chose to step back into a cozy little part-time routine, so he doesn't have to stress his brain too much. You can't expect a man with zero corporate ambition to keep up with someone like me, who actually carries the heavy financial lifting for this family. Victoria let out a refined, mocking laugh into her silk napkin, while Julian smirked triumphantly toward the ceiling. I stood there in my worn boots, holding the heavy platter, thinking about the premarital stock liquidation, the commercial loan guarantee written solely under my name, and the private safe locked in her closet. I set the platter down in silence, swallowing my dignity for the sake of keeping the peace. Tragically, the poison of her arrogance had already infected my eldest child. A week after that humiliating afternoon at Carlton Woods, 17-year-old Chloe sat in the passenger seat of my Ford F-150 as I drove her toward the elite equestrian club off Woodlands Parkway where she trained. As I approached the main security gate where her teammates and their wealthy parents were gathered, Chloe suddenly grabbed her leather riding boots and pointed frantically toward a side street 2 blocks away. "Dad, pull over right here," she demanded, refusing to make eye contact as she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Drop me off by the trees. I'll walk the rest of the way." When I asked her why, she rolled her eyes with a cold, teenage sneer that perfectly mirrored her mother's exact posture. "Because everyone sees the Porsche Cayenne when mom drops me off, and I don't want my friends seeing me step out of this outdated work truck." My heart shattered right there against the steering wheel. I parked by the curb, watched my daughter walk away without a backward glance, and sat in absolute silence as the idling V8 engine hummed hollowly against my chest. The absolute breaking point of my personal dignity arrived on a humid Saturday afternoon. For years, my one sacred sanctuary had been my woodworking bench in the third bay of our garage. I kept a neat, organized chest of heavy-duty hand tools that belonged to my late father, tools he had used as a carpenter, meticulously oiled, polished, and passed down to me as his legacy. When I returned home from an on-site server installation, I pulled into the driveway and noticed the third bay was completely bare. I walked around to the side of the house and found my father's irreplaceable brass-fitted planes and handsaws jammed callously inside the heavy plastic recycling bins, waiting for the trash truck. I marched into the kitchen, my chest tight with a dark, suffocating rage. Evelyn didn't even bother looking up from her iPad as she sat at the quartz island. She casually took a sip of her iced matcha latte and shrugged with complete indifference. "I threw them out, Marcus," she said, her voice flat and utterly cold. They were rusty, cheap eyesores that completely ruined the aesthetic of the garage whenever I parked my Porsche. Buy some cheap plastic tools from Home Depot if you really need to mess around in the dirt. Or better yet, hire a handyman like normal families in Carlton Woods do. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the empty floor space where my father's memory had once rested, realizing with absolute terrifying clarity that my wife didn't just take my financial sacrifice for granted. She actively despised every single thing I was. By late autumn, the emotional climate inside our home in the woodlands had turned colder than the November winds sweeping across Lake Conroe. The quiet disrespect that had been festering behind closed doors finally escalated into open, unbridled contempt. It began on a crisp Tuesday evening when 14-year-old Ethan walked into the kitchen, holding a glossy brochure for the first robotics state championship, a prestigious competition featuring elite student teams from across Texas. He stood near the quartz island, his eyes shining with the pure, frantic ambition of a brilliant kid who had spent months coding and designing an advanced chassis. The registration and specialized component fee was $5,000, due immediately to secure his team's slot. I took the paperwork, sat down at the table with a pencil, and looked at our family calendar. My semi-annual Harris County property tax assessment, a brutal $7,000 obligation, was hitting my checking account in less than 2 weeks. I looked up at my son with a calm, encouraging smile. "Ethan, buddy, this is an incredible achievement," I said, gently tapping the brochure. "I can't write a $5,000 check this exact week because the county tax bill clears in 11 days. But sit down with me this weekend. We'll map out the budget for next month, and I'll make sure you get those parts and get on that stage." Ethan immediately slumped his shoulders, letting out a dramatic, bitter sigh, the exact rehearsed sigh of a child who had been systematically taught by his mother to expect nothing but disappointment from his father. Before I could say another word, Evelyn strutted into the kitchen, her high heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She didn't bother asking what we were discussing. She simply read the tension in the room and moved in for the kill. Reaching into her designer tote bag, she pulled out a gleaming black American Express Centurion card and slammed it onto the granite counter with a loud, theatrical slap. "Here you go, sweetie," Evelyn cooed, wrapping her arm around Ethan's shoulders while staring straight past me as if I were invisible. "Mommy's got you covered. It's a tragic shame that only one parent in this house actually cares about your talent and your future." Ethan's face lit up like Christmas morning. He snatched the card, gave his mother a fierce hug, and walked out of the room without offering me a single glance. I sat alone at the table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the icy sting of being turned into an absolute stranger in my own home, the absolute breaking point, the moment that permanently shattered 12 years of quiet endurance, arrived 2 nights later on a bleak Thursday evening. Earlier that afternoon, a severe storm had knocked out the primary data server at our third dental clinic location off Kuykendall Road. To save her company the $3,000 emergency IT dispatch fee, I spent 6 grueling hours standing in a muddy, freezing rain alleyway behind the building, working on the external fiber optic casing and reconfiguring the router network until my fingers were completely numb. I arrived home past 8, exhausted to the bone, changed out of my soaked work clothes, and walked into the quiet kitchen to reheat a simple plate of leftovers. I pulled a ceramic plate from the microwave, completely absorbed in the quiet comfort of finally unwinding after a brutal day. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut, echoing down the hallway. Evelyn stormed into the kitchen, still wearing her tailored blazer from an evening charity gala. She was locked in a heated, furious phone call with a vendor, her face flushed with rage. As she paced near the island, she aggressively gestured with her hands, accidentally hooking her sleeve on a crystal wine glass sitting near the edge of the counter. Instead of catching it, she violently whipped her arm out in frustration, sending the heavy crystal glass flying across the kitchen. It crashed directly against the tile floor right beside my boots, exploding into dozens of razor-sharp fragments. A jagged shard sliced clean through my thin sock, gushing blood across my foot and the white porcelain tiles. I gasped from the sudden, sharp pain and took a step back, but Evelyn didn't even flinch. She ended her call with a sharp tap on her screen, glared at the mess, and turned her fury entirely onto me. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Look at you, standing there like a clumsy idiot," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You're so agonizingly slow and useless, always getting in my way. Do you have any idea that glass cost more than your entire pathetic month of freelance consulting money? Clean up your mess, wrap your foot, and get the hell out of my sight, you worthless anchor living off my success." The kitchen fell into a suffocating dead silence. I stood motionless, blood dripping onto the floor of the house I had personally guaranteed, the house whose mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance I had single-handedly paid for 12 straight years. I looked at my wife, remembering the premarital stock liquidation that saved her from bankruptcy, the cold nights spent painting her first clinic walls until 3 in the morning, and the promise she made to honor our sanctuary forever. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall, nor did I raise my voice. I slowly dropped to one knee, wrapped a paper towel tightly around my bleeding foot, and picked up the jagged glass shards one by one with my bare hands until the floor was spotless. When I stood up, something deep inside my chest permanently clicked into place. The anger was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying, crystal-clear resolve of a man who was finally done. Angry men make noise. Men who are done make moves. I looked at my wife's cold, arrogant face, wiped the blood from my hands with a damp cloth, and said in a low, steady voice, "I understand." I walked down the hallway to my private office, closed the door softly, opened my laptop, and began gathering the financial and intellectual property records that would dismantle her gilded world piece by piece. The counter was officially running. At precisely 8:30 the following morning, I pulled my Ford F-150 into the subterranean parking garage of a glass and steel skyscraper in downtown Houston. I sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, adjusting my necktie in the rearview mirror and drawing a slow, deliberate breath. The throbbing ache from the cut on my foot was gone, replaced by the icy, surgical focus of an engineer about to dismantle a failed structure. On the passenger seat rested a heavy leather briefcase filled with 12 years of immaculate documentation, every server log, copyright registration, premarital bank transfer, and commercial lease agreement I had quietly filed away. I stepped out of the truck, rode the high-speed elevator up to the 42nd floor, and walked into the reception area of Sterling and Associates. Attorney Arthur Sterling was a formidable figure in Texas matrimonial and corporate law, a senior partner in his early 60s with sharp, silver hair, tailored three-piece suits, and a reputation for cold, uncompromising brilliance. Arthur was the kind of legal mind who saw right through emotional noise to the mathematical truth underneath. He greeted me in his sunlit corner office overlooking the Houston skyline, poured 2 cups of black coffee, and motioned for me to take a seat across from his polished mahogany desk. Without saying a word, I opened my briefcase, laid out the categorized folders in neat rows, and recounted my story. From the premarital software sale to the shattered glass on my kitchen floor, Arthur put on his gold-rimmed reading glasses and spent 20 uninterrupted minutes examining the paper trail. The office was completely silent except for the quiet rustle of documents and the periodic tap of his fountain pen. When he finally looked up, his sharp gray eyes glinted with a cold, dangerous satisfaction. "Mr. Vance," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "do you realize the exact nature of the trap your wife has walked into?" "I'm beginning to," I replied, my voice calm and completely devoid of tremor. Arthur pulled the first folder toward him, breaking down the corporate math with the precision of a chess grandmaster. First came the proprietary software platform that powered all 3 locations of Vance Cosmetic Dentistry. Because I had coded the underlying architecture entirely independently and registered the United States Copyright Office documentation solely under my name prior to our marriage, the intellectual property was legally classified as my separate non-marital asset. "She didn't just use your system, Marcus," Arthur explained, tapping the copyright certificate. "She built her entire operational infrastructure, patient database, and automated billing network on software she has zero legal right to own. We can file an immediate petition for an emergency cease and desist injunction. Effective upon court order, her access to your server network is revoked. Without your code, her 3 clinics cannot process a single appointment, billing claim, or patient record. Then Arthur pulled out the original commercial lease guarantees and premarital loan collateral documents for the flagship location on Woodlands Parkway. Her legal counsel will attempt to argue that your financial backing was a gift to the marriage, Arthur said, a thin smirk touching his lips. However, because your premarital capital was pledged before she drew a single dollar of practice revenue, and because she used that exact corporate leverage to secure her personal wealth and lease her luxury Porsche, we frame this as a direct, quantifiable advance against her marital share. Furthermore, because you personally guaranteed the master lease contracts, we can petition the court for an emergency conditional asset authorization. We force a liquidation of the business entity's surplus liquid capital into a court-monitored escrow account to satisfy that initial premarital debt before she touches a single cent. Next, Arthur turned his attention to the custody of Chloe and Ethan. I explained my daily routine, driving them across Montgomery County every morning, cooking 4 meals a week, managing their school schedules, attending robotics meetings, and taking lower-paying freelance work specifically to be an active father. Arthur pulled up his desktop monitor, typed rapidly, and turned the screen toward me. He had pulled up Evelyn's public LinkedIn profile alongside a series of feature articles from Houston business journals, highlighting posts where she repeatedly bragged about working 80-hour weeks and flying off to high society medical galas in Las Vegas, Miami, and New York. Your wife just handed us primary physical custody on a silver platter, Arthur said, pointing to the time-stamped posts and travel itineraries. She spent years publicly documenting her chronic physical absence from the household in the name of corporate prestige. Combined with your 12-year history as the sole primary caregiver, no family court judge in Harris or Montgomery County will disrupt those children's daily stability by placing them in her care. Finally, Arthur brought up the state of Texas child support guidelines, entering Evelyn's verified gross annual income alongside my reduced freelance figures. He ran the official spousal maintenance and child support formulas, then turned the digital calculator toward me. The bold black numbers on the screen settled at a mandatory $3,500 per month, payable directly from Evelyn Vance to Marcus Vance, beginning immediately upon judicial signature. I stared at the display for a long moment. It wasn't about vengeance. It was the absolute poetic equilibrium of an equation that had been lopsided for over a decade. The woman who had kicked my plate away and called me a useless anchor was about to be legally mandated to pay $3,500 a month to the very man she claimed was living off her success. We file the emergency petitions quietly this afternoon, Arthur said, closing the leather binder with a decisive thud. The court order will mandate the software revocation and escrow freezes within 4 weeks. Can you go home every night until then and act as if nothing has changed? I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the morning sun, reflecting off the glass towers of downtown Houston, feeling an unshakable, profound peace settle into my chest. Arthur, I said softly, I've been playing a role in that house for 12 years. 4 more weeks will be a walk in the park. He nodded, uncapped his pen, and smiled. Then let's shut her down. Executing a silent legal strike is not a test of strategy. It is a brutal test of nerve. The attorneys handle the courtroom filings, the copyright affidavits, and the emergency motions. But you are the one who has to drive home every single evening, walk through the front door, and sit across the kitchen table from a person who believes she still owns your soul. For 4 agonizing weeks, I moved through our home in the Woodlands like an actor playing the most disciplined role of his life. I maintained my precise daily routine without a single crack. I woke up at dawn, cooked breakfast, managed the utility bills, and drove Ethan and Chloe to their commitments while the late autumn skies grew darker and colder. I absorbed Evelyn's dismissive glares and ignored her condescending sighs, letting her believe that her insult over the shattered glass had succeeded in cowing me into permanent submission. During those 4 weeks, I poured whatever quiet energy I had left into my children. Every evening after dinner, while Evelyn was upstairs in her office, sipping wine and taking corporate calls, 14-year-old Ethan and I sat together at the dining table. I quietly walked him through advanced C++ logic and motion control algorithms for his first robotics chassis. I didn't take credit for his code. I simply asked guiding questions, watching his face light up as he solved complex spatial equations on his laptop. He was a brilliant kid, and for the first time in years, the artificial wall his mother had built between us began to crumble, replaced by the quiet, mutual respect of two minds working in tandem. During the third week of November, 17-year-old Chloe had her final regional equestrian championship down in Austin, a grueling 3-hour drive west from the Woodlands. The Saturday weather was unforgiving, bringing a blistering 85-degree Texas sun that beat down relentless heat over the dusty dirt arena. I took the morning off from my freelance work, ironed my shirt, packed a cooler with cold water, and drove the Ford F-150 3 hours down the highway alone. While Evelyn was at an exclusive high society family brunch at a country club in Buckhead, posting selfies with her mother and bragging about her luxury lifestyle, I sat alone on the dusty wooden bleachers under the scorching heat, watching my daughter compete in the arena. During her second jumping pass, Chloe's horse balked at a triple bar rail. She lost her stirrups, slipped over the saddle, and hit the hard dirt-packed ground with a thud. The entire spectator crowd gasped. Her trainer rushed forward, but before anyone else reached the arena floor, I was already vaulting over the wooden fence. I ran across the dusty turf, knelt beside her, and checked her hands and back for injuries. She had scraped her shoulder and sprained her ankle, tears mixing with dirt on her pale face. As I gently gathered her up into my arms and carried her out of the dusty arena toward the medic tent, she looked up at my sweat-stained shirt, her voice small and trembling. "Dad, you didn't have to come all the way to Austin," she mumbled, hiding her face against my chest. I looked down at her, offered a warm, gentle smile, and brushed the dust from her forehead. "You did an incredible job out there, Chloe," I said softly. "I'll always be right here." She fell silent, her hand tightly gripping my sleeve as I carried her all the way to the Ford F-150. While I was quietly upholding my duties as a father, the legal gears were spinning toward their absolute climax. By late November, Arthur Sterling had secured the emergency conditional court mandate. The judge had officially signed the order approving the software copyright revocation and the immediate freezing of the practice's surplus corporate accounts to satisfy her premarital debt offset. With my legal trap locked into place, I quietly signed a lease on a bright, spacious garden villa near the Woodlands Waterway, located within the exact same school district and along the same morning commute route, ensuring zero disruption to Ethan and Chloe's daily lives. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, while Evelyn was at her Sandy Springs office, I packed 3 heavy duffel bags with my personal belongings, the items that were mine before our marriage, my father's surviving photos, my work documents, and my clothes. I staged the bags in the back of the hallway coat closet, hidden neatly behind the long winter coats. The 10th anniversary gala celebrating Vance Cosmetic Dentistry was scheduled for Saturday, December 14th, at the Westin Hotel, overlooking the waterway. True to her nature, Evelyn had organized a lavish, self-aggrandizing celebration, a catered affair for 100 high society guests, investors, and corporate acquaintances. Her mother, Victoria, had flown in from River Oaks, and her brother Julian was acting as the master of ceremonies. Evelyn had mentioned the party to me twice in passing, both times without looking up from her phone, treating me like a hired staff member who was expected to stay out of the sight of her guests. I simply smiled and told her it sounded like a wonderful evening. On the Sunday before the gala, while Evelyn and Victoria were out shopping at the Galleria in Houston, I sat alone at the kitchen island. On the granite counter rested a sleek, high-end presentation briefcase made of dark Italian leather, wrapped in deep navy paper and tied with a thick golden silk ribbon. Inside that briefcase sat the 3-inch thick legal binder containing the machinery of her ruin: the official divorce petition, the motion for primary physical custody, the emergency court order revoking her license to my proprietary software platform, and the binding support worksheet ordering her to pay $3,500 a month. On top of the binder, I tucked a crisp, handwritten card. It read, "Happy 10th anniversary, Evelyn. It's time to run your empire without me." I creased the edges of the dark navy paper with surgical precision, tied the golden bow twice until it sat perfectly, and set the heavy briefcase on the hallway shelf right above my packed duffel bags, waiting for Saturday night. Saturday, December 14th, arrived under the dark, overcast canopy of a cold Texas winter evening. On the outside, it appeared like any other brisk night, but inside the grand ballroom of the West in the Woodlands, Evelyn was in full production mode. She had rented out the main ballroom overlooking the waterway, hiring an elite event planning agency out of Houston that set up towering floral arrangements, ice sculptures, and shimmering crystal chandeliers across the hall. A massive gold-lettered banner stretching behind the main stage declared, "Celebrating 10 years of Vance Cosmetic Dentistry in glittering calligraphy." By 7:00 p.m., 100 distinguished guests filled the venue. Prominent Houston surgeons, commercial bankers, regional healthcare executives, and high society figures. Evelyn's mother, Victoria, swept through the room in a champagne silk gown, regaling a circle of hospital board members with exaggerated tales of her daughter's genius. Center stage sat a 5-tiered custom cake adorned with edible gold leaf and a high-resolution photo of Evelyn's corporate headshot. Evelyn glided through the room in an emerald green designer dress, holding court as the undisputed queen of her self-made universe, while Chloe and Ethan stood near the edge of the crowd, quietly holding their punch glasses. At precisely 8:30 p.m., the master of ceremonies, Evelyn's brother, Julian, stepped up to the podium, tapped his crystal glass, and summoned the crowd to gather around the main stage. The ambient ballroom lights dimmed as Evelyn glided up the carpeted steps to deliver her keynote speech. She leaned into the microphone with practiced theatrical grace, eyes shining, chin tilted high, one manicured hand pressed against her chest to soak in every second of admiration. For 10 straight minutes, she delivered a self-aggrandizing monologue about her tireless hustle, boasting about how she had single-handedly built a multi-million-dollar, 3-location dental empire from absolute scratch through her own sheer brilliance and grit, conveniently erasing every trace of my labor from her story. As the thunderous applause broke out and someone shouted for a toast, I quietly stepped out from the shadowed hallway near the wings. I was wearing my dark tailored suit, carrying the heavy, dark Italian leather presentation briefcase wrapped in deep navy paper, tied with the golden silk ribbon. A sudden hush rippled across the room as 100 pairs of eyes tracked the husband, who had been treated like an invisible ghost all evening, now walking directly toward the center of the illuminated stage. Evelyn turned and saw the briefcase in my hands. She glanced at her mother near the front row, with a small, condescending smirk, that subtle, arrogant look born from years of conditioned superiority. "Well, let's see what little token my husband scraped together for my big night." She sneered lightly into the microphone, stepping forward to accept the package. Holding it up high for her audience like a prized trophy, she set it down on the podium, unknotted the golden silk bow, and tore through the navy paper. For 3 agonizing seconds, absolute, suffocating silence descended upon the grand ballroom as Evelyn stared into the leather briefcase. Her brain violently struggled to process the 3-inch thick legal binder resting inside instead of diamond jewelry or designer watches. Then, every drop of blood drained from her face, turning her skin ash white as her manicured fingers began to tremble uncontrollably. With 2 shaking fingers, she lifted the top document, the formal petition for dissolution of marriage, followed by the motion for primary physical custody. Beneath those lay the court's emergency injunction, revoking her corporate license to my proprietary management software, triggering an automated system disconnect in precisely 12 hours. And circled in bold red ink on the final support worksheet was the state calculated figure, $3,500 per month in mandatory support, payable by Evelyn Vance to Marcus Vance, with the very first installment due that coming Friday. The gala's celebratory atmosphere shattered into total chaos. Victoria stormed up the stage steps, peered over her daughter's shaking shoulder, read enough of the legal headers to grasp the reality, and let out a blood-curdling screech that echoed through the high ceilings. "Are you out of your mind?" Victoria screamed, her face contorting with grotesque, uncontrolled rage as she pointed a trembling finger at my chest. On her 10th anniversary gala? In front of her colleagues, her bankers, and high society? You ungrateful, despicable, dirty little parasite. You've been freeloading off my daughter's brilliance for 10 years, and now you try to destroy her on her biggest night? I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I stepped forward, calmly took the wireless microphone directly out of Julian's limp hand, turned toward the crowd of 100 silent guests, and delivered a response that cut through Victoria's hysteria like a razor blade. "Victoria," I said, my voice ice-cold, steady, and amplified through the ballroom speakers, "you have spent the last decade boasting to anyone in Houston who would listen about how your daughter single-handedly built this empire on her own. Well, congratulations. Starting tomorrow, she actually gets to try it." At 8 a.m. sharp, my proprietary software platform shuts down permanently across all 3 locations. Every server, every patient record, and every scheduling database will go completely dark. Let's see how she operates her empire without the man who built it. And Evelyn, your first $3,500 check to me is due this Friday. The words landed with the crushing force of a sledgehammer. Victoria gasped violently for air, her eyes bulging as the color flushed out of her face. She clutched her chest in sheer shock, her blood pressure spiking so intensely that her knees buckled on the carpeted stage. Julian and Tom had to rush forward and catch her by the arms as she collapsed backward, hyperventilating and completely stripped of her venomous voice. Evelyn remained frozen at the podium, clutching the legal binder against her green designer dress, staring at me in exposed, absolute horror as the grand illusion of her perfect life crumbled into ash before her entire world. The grand ballroom hung in a suffocating, unnatural silence. Victoria was hyperventilating on a folding chair near the stage wings. Julian was frantically fanning his mother with a gala program, and 100 high society guests stood paralyzed like statues beside the ice sculptures and the gold leaf anniversary cake. Evelyn remained pinned against the podium, clutching the 3-inch legal binder to her chest, her eyes wide, glassy, and utterly hollow. I turned away from the spectacle of her inner circle and looked down the stage steps toward the archway, where my 2 children were standing. 17-year-old Chloe was frozen, her hands trembling around her glass, her sharp mind processing the total collapse of her mother's world. 14-year-old Ethan stood beside her, his face pale, his eyes darting back and forth between his trembling mother and the unyielding, immovable composure in my gaze. I took 3 slow, deliberate steps toward the center of the stage, keeping the wireless microphone raised so that every single person in that room, from the commercial bankers to the high society surgeons, could hear every single syllable I uttered. I didn't yell. I didn't drop my voice to a whisper. I spoke with the undeniable, resonant weight of a father who was finally laying down a crushing burden he had carried in complete secret for 12 long years. "Chloe, Ethan," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy ballroom air with absolute authority. "For years, you 2 have been systematically taught to look at me like a failure, a quiet, unambitious man who couldn't buy your affection with leased Porsche Cayennes, luxury trips to Scottsdale, or flashy social media posts. But here is the truth your mother never told you. Before either of you were old enough to remember, I liquidated my entire pre-marital software portfolio and pledged every single dollar of my personal collateral to guarantee the commercial loan that opened her very first clinic on Woodlands Parkway. I paid off her past and built her foundation so she could have the very corporate career she's being celebrated for tonight. Ethan's breath hitched sharply, and Chloe's mouth opened in sheer, speechless shock. Evelyn tried to interject, her lips moving frantically, but not a single sound emerged from her dry throat. And as you grew up, I continued, stepping down the stage stairs directly toward my kids, I made a deliberate, conscious choice. I stepped away from my high-earning software engineering career and took lower-paying freelance contracts right here in the Woodlands. I did it so I could be the parent who actually raised you. I took that hit so I could cook your dinners 4 nights a week, drive you across Montgomery County every morning, spend 6 hours in freezing, rain-fixing clinic servers to save her money, sit under a blistering sun in Austin when you fell off your horse, and spend hundreds of late nights teaching Ethan the logic behind his robotics code. Every single month for 12 years, my personal savings ran straight to zero to pay the mortgage on our home, the county property taxes, and the health insurance that protected you, while your mother kept her massive salary pure, untouched spending money for Neiman Marcus, halls, luxury leases, and weekend getaways with her friends. A small, shuddering gasp broke from Chloe's throat. Tears brimmed in her eyes and spilled over her cheeks as the heavy, ugly illusion of her childhood shattered into 1,000 pieces. She suddenly dropped her glass, sprinted across the carpeted floor, and threw her arms tightly around my waist, burying her face into my chest and sobbing uncontrollably. I wrapped my left arm tightly around her shoulders, keeping my steady gaze locked onto my son. Ethan didn't cry. Instead, his jaw tightened so hard, the muscles flexed beneath his skin. A dark, fierce fire ignited in his eyes as he looked past me at his mother. He slowly walked up the stage steps to where Evelyn's designer leather tote bag was resting near the podium. Without taking his eyes off her pale, horrified face, Ethan reached into her bag, snatched the gleaming black American Express Centurion card, the very card she had used to humiliate me weeks prior, and slammed it down onto the stage floor right beside her 5-tiered gold leaf cake. "Keep your trash, Mom," Ethan spat out, his voice trembling with a cold, explosive rage that echoed off the high ceilings. "I don't need this card to build robots anymore. Dad is the one who actually taught me how to code." Ethan turned on his heel, walked down the steps, and took his sister gently by the hand. He looked up at me, his chin raised high. "Dad, where are our bags?" he asked softly. "In the hall closet back at the house, son," I replied gently. "We're picking them up on the way to our new home." Without another word, Ethan picked up his jacket, held his sister's hand, and stood beside me near the exit doors. I looked back at the grand ballroom one final time. The catering staff stood motionless by the silver trays, utterly stunned. Victoria sat slumped in her chair, holding a glass of ice water with shaking hands, completely stripped of her arrogant bite. And in the very center of the ruined gala, standing completely alone inside an empire she had never owned, was Evelyn, clutching a legal binder, surrounded by 100 silent guests, staring at the empty doorway where the true foundation of her life had just walked out. "Happy 10th anniversary, Evelyn," I said quietly into the microphone, setting it gently down on a nearby table. I turned around, opened the heavy glass doors, and stepped out into the crisp December night air with my children right beside me, leaving the wreckage of her illusions behind us forever. The heavy glass doors of the Westin Hotel closed behind us with a muffled thud, severing the panicked murmurs of 100 stunned guests and leaving the suffocating aura of the ruined anniversary gala behind forever. The crisp, clean December air hit my lungs like a long overdue breath of freedom. I loaded my 2-pack duffel bags and the children's backpacks into the bed of my 2018 Ford F-150 Lariat, the very truck my brother-in-law had sneered at and my daughter had once been ashamed to be seen in, and shut the tailgate with a solid, definitive bang. Ethan opened the front passenger door and climbed in without hesitation, while Chloe settled quietly into the spacious back seat, wrapping her winter coat around her shoulders. I stepped into the driver's seat, adjusted the rearview mirror, and turned the key in the ignition. The steady, deep rumble of the V8 engine sounded sweeter than it ever had in 12 long years. I pulled out of the valet drive slowly, leaving the brightly lit hotel entrance, the leased Porsche Cayenne, and the shattered wreckage of Evelyn's illusion behind us in the quiet winter night. As I pointed the Ford F-150 south toward our new three-bedroom garden villa along the Woodlands waterway, the silence inside the cabin was dense. But for the first time in over a decade, it wasn't heavy with unspoken resentment. It was the calm, settled quiet of a storm that had finally passed. The pine tree canopy of Montgomery County stretched ahead along the dimly lit avenue, standing tall and timeless against the clear night sky. I turned up the climate control, letting warm air wash over us, thawing the damp, freezing chill that had lingered in my bones since those brutal hours fixing fiber optic cables in the alley behind the third location branch. About 10 minutes into the drive, Chloe leaned forward from the back seat, resting her arms near the center console. Her eyes were still slightly rimmed with red from crying, but the guarded, status-obsessed look she had inherited from her mother was completely gone, replaced by a soft, raw vulnerability. "Dad?" she asked softly, her voice trembling just enough to catch in her throat. That scorching afternoon in Austin, when my horse balked and I took that hard fall in the dirt arena, were you really sitting in those bleachers the whole 3 hours under that scorching sun before it even happened? I glanced up at her in the rearview mirror and offered a warm, gentle smile. "Every single minute, sweetheart," I replied softly, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. From the morning warm-ups to the moment they called your rider number. My shirt was soaked through with sweat, my boots were covered in dust, and my lower back was aching the whole ride back to Houston. But I wouldn't have missed seeing you ride or being there to carry you out of that dust for anything in the world. A soft, shuddering breath escaped Chloe's lips as she reached her hand forward, placing it gently over my shoulder, a silent gesture of profound, unspoken remorse. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking as tears spilled over her cheeks again. "For all those times I asked you to drop me off 2 blocks away, for being so blind to what Mom was doing to you. I was so stupid." "You don't need to apologize, Chloe," I said gently, squeezing her hand briefly before placing mine back on the wheel. "You were trapped in a story that wasn't true. Now you know the truth, and that's all that matters." In the passenger seat beside me, Ethan sat completely still. Slowly, deliberately, he reached down into his backpack, pulled out his tablet, and turned the screen toward me. Displayed on the glass was an official email notification from the First Robotics State Committee, stamped with a golden first-place trophy icon. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice brimming with a quiet, unshakable pride. "The motion control algorithms we optimized at the kitchen table last week. The autonomous code ran flawlessly during the final round testing today. Our team took first place in the entire state bracket." A genuine laugh of pure joy broke from my chest. "I knew you'd pull it off, son," I said, looking over at him with pride. "Your logic was ironclad from the start." Ethan stared out the windshield at the passing pine trees for a long moment, his chest heaving as the weight of years of silent manipulation crumbled away. Then, without saying another word, he reached his right hand across the center console, found my calloused, labor-worn hand resting near the gear shift, and squeezed it tight with a fierce, trembling grip. Tears welled in the corners of my eyes as I squeezed his hand back, knowing in that single, wordless gesture that I hadn't just won a legal battle. I had recovered my family. The dark, overcast winter sky over. The woodlands finally began to break apart as the first light of dawn pierced the horizon, letting brilliant golden rays of sunlight illuminate the pine canopy along the waterway. We pulled into the quiet complex, a clean, beautiful sanctuary in the exact same school district, complete with a spacious kitchen, a workshop area, and a room for each of my children. As I parked the F-150 and cut the engine, I looked at Ethan and Chloe in the quiet warmth of the cabin. The long, unbalanced equation had finally settled into absolute equilibrium. The grand house, the corporate prestige, and the illusion of wealth were all gone, but the true foundation was right where it belonged, grounded in truth, quiet sacrifice, and unshakable love. Thank you for tuning into this explosive chapter of Dad's ultimate payback. If this story of an underappreciated father's quiet endurance, a mother's catastrophic arrogance, and the ultimate triumph of truth touched your heart today, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single update. Drop a comment below letting me know the exact city, state, or country you are watching from today. A massive shout out to all our loyal viewers standing strong for their families across the globe. And if you want to see the explosive aftermath, when Evelyn's 3 clinic locations are completely shut down after 6 weeks, leaving her broke, desperate, and crawling to our waterway villa to beg for a negotiation, let me know in the comments below. Keep your principles unshakable, protect your legacy, and I will see you in the next episode.